The transport's hull screamed as it tore through 0's atmosphere, trailing smoke and debris across a crimson sky. Inside, 23 cadets from 7 different species clutched their harnesses while alarms shrieked warnings in 4 languages. The impact came hard metal grinding against stone, the vessel cartwheeling twice before sliding to rest in a canyon of rust-colored sand. When the emergency lights flickered on, revealing cracked viewports and sparking consoles, the silence that followed felt heavier than the crash itself. Lieutenant Vorak, a Kryn with 4 arms and iridescent scales, unbuckled first. 2 of his limbs hung limp from the impact. "Status report," he rasped, but his voice carried no authority, only pain and poorly concealed fear. Around him, students stumbled from their seats. A Saluthian girl with translucent skin was crying, her bioluminescent organs pulsing erratically. 3 Vothari brothers checked each other for injuries with their telepathic bond, their 6 eyes wide with shared terror. Marcus Reeves moved methodically through the wreckage, his human frame seeming unremarkable among the exotic physiologies surrounding him. He'd been the quiet one for 6 months at the academy, the engineering student who sat in back rows and declined invitations to social events. Now he pulled a medkit from an emergency locker, tossed it to the nearest uninjured cadet, and moved to the breached airlock. "The hull's compromised," announced Instructor Thelkor, a towering Granali whose tentacles quivered with each word. "Communications are down. We're stuck until rescue arrives." She consulted a damaged datapad, her trifocal eyes narrowing. Estimated response time, 47 hours. Marcus stood at the opening, staring at the landscape. The canyon stretched 4 kilometers in both directions, walls of striated stone rising 50 meters high. The sand beneath looked wrong to red, too reflective, like crushed rubies mixed with metal shavings. Heat ripples distorted the air, even though 2 of 0's 3 suns had already set below the horizon. "We don't have 47 hours, Marcus said quietly. Thelkor's tentacles stiffened. "Cadet Reeves, this is not the time for look at the sky." Everyone turned. The remaining sun hung bloated and angry, but that wasn't what Marcus meant. Above it, the upper atmosphere roiled with colors that had no names in any of their languages, purples that hurt to observe, greens that seemed to fold space around themselves. Lightning arced between clouds that moved against the wind, and the air itself had begun to hum with a frequency that made their bones ache. "Firestorm," breathed Calyx, a 4-armed Zyth, who'd actually studied xenometeorology. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme distress among his kind. "The atmospheric plasma discharge phenomenon." The briefings mentioned it, but the probability was listed as 0.03%. "We weren't supposed to." "How long?" Marcus interrupted. Calyx's translator struggled to convey the chittering panic in his native tongue. "Minutes, maybe an hour if we're fortunate. The plasma superheats everything it touches to 3,000 degrees. The electromagnetic pulse will fry any electronics. There's no shelter here." "No, then we dig." 23 pairs of alien eyes focused on the human. Lieutenant Vorak managed a pained laugh. "Dig, cadet. This isn't Earth. We don't have excavation equipment, and even if we did," Marcus was already moving. He grabbed a torn panel from the ship's interior, its edge sharp enough to cut. From a tool locker he retrieved a plasma cutter designed for emergency hull repairs, its power cell at 30%. He slung a thermal blanket over his shoulder and walked out into the canyon. "Where is he going?" the Salothian girl whispered. "To die," Vorak muttered. "Thelkor, we need to seal what's left of the ship. Use it as shelter." The instructor's tentacles writhed in thought. "The hull breaches are too extensive. The plasma will flow through like water through a net. But perhaps, if we—" Marcus's voice carried back from 30 meters away, where he'd started carving into the canyon wall with the plasma cutter. "We dig trenches, deep, angled away from the storm direction. We cover them with anything that can deflect heat. We survive until rescue." "That's insane," Calyx called out. "Trenches are a primitive warfare tactic. This is a natural disaster, not— Fire doesn't care what you call it." Marcus didn't stop working. The plasma cutter wind as it sliced through compressed sediment, sending up clouds of acrid smoke. He'd already carved a meter-deep groove into the canyon floor, angling it back toward the wall to create a natural deflection point. "My great-grandfather fought in the Syrian wastes. Temperature there hit 200 degrees in the shade. He taught me how soldiers survived when their vehicles broke down and air support couldn't reach them. You dig, You orient away from the heat source. You layer your defenses. He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. And you move fast, because the storm won't wait for you to feel ready. The sky answered him with a crack of thunder that wasn't quite thunder, something deeper, resonant, like the universe clearing its throat. The strange lightning intensified, and now they could all see it. A wall of fire-colored plasma rolling across the horizon, devouring the landscape kilometer by kilometer. 12 minutes, Calyx whispered, his instruments somehow still functioning. At current velocity, ... Marcus turned to face them. His gray eyes held something the others hadn't seen before, not fear, but the absolute certainty of someone who'd made peace with worst-case scenarios long ago. I can dig 3 trenches with this cutter before the power dies. Each holds maybe 5 people if you squeeze. Anyone who wants to survive, grab anything metal and start expanding the trenches by hand. Anyone who doesn't, stay with the ship and hope. For a moment, nobody moved. Then one of the Vothri brothers, the eldest, stepped forward. His 3-fingered hands were designed for delicate mechanical work, not manual labor. But he knelt beside Marcus's initial trench and began scraping sand with a piece of hull plating. His siblings joined him wordlessly, their telepathic link synchronizing their efforts. The Soluthian girl came next, her bioluminescence steadying as purpose replaced panic. Then a hulking Granal male who'd barely spoken during the entire academy term. One by one, they abandoned the false security of the wrecked transport and joined the human in his desperate excavation. Not everyone came. Lieutenant Vorak and 6 others sealed themselves in the ship's command module, welding the doors shut from inside. Through the viewports, Marcus could see them watching, waiting to see if his gambit would work, or if they'd just condemned him to die tired. The first trench took 8 minutes. Marcus carved the primary cut, while others widened and deepened it, with improvised tools, steel panels that bent under stress, cargo hooks that served as pickaxes, even bare hands clawing at the alien soil. The plasma cutter's power gauge dropped to 15%. The sky had gone from crimson to something approaching purple-black, and the temperature had risen 20 degrees in as many minutes. Second trench, Marcus commanded, moving 15 meters parallel to the first. Calyx, which direction is the storm moving? The Scythe consulted his failing instruments. Northwest to southeast. But Marcus, the plasma doesn't move in straight lines, it cascades, finding the path of least resistance, following electrical gradients. ... So we create better gradients. Marcus carved the second trench at a 45-degree angle to the first, creating a channel system. The plasma will follow the paths we give it, at least partially. We're not trying to stop it, we're trying to survive it. 5% power remaining. His hands were blistering through his gloves, his shoulders screaming from the plasma cutter's vibration. The air itself had become thick, each breath tasting of ozone and something metallic that made his teeth ache. Through the gathering darkness, the firestorm was clearly visible now, wall of pure energy that touched earth and sky, advancing with the inevitability of nightfall. Third trench, he said, but the plasma cutter died in his hands. The power cell finally depleted, its last sparks earthing harmlessly into the sand. Marcus, the granally male, his name was Tom. Marcus suddenly remembered, placed a massive hand on his shoulder. We have 2 trenches. That's 10 survivors if we're lucky. There are 17 of us out here. Marcus looked at the gathered cadets, dirt-streaked faces of a dozen species, all watching him with the same desperate hope. He thought of his grandfather's stories, of soldiers sharing foxholes in desert wars that predated spaceflight, of how humanity had learned to survive in hostile places by being just slightly more stubborn than the universe trying to kill them. Then we make the trenches deeper instead of wider. He grabbed a hull panel and jumped into the first excavation. Double stack, small species on the bottom, larger ones above. We use our bodies as insulation layers. We share the thermal blanket stone. Wrap yourselves, drape them over the trench openings and hold them down. The plasma will flow over, not through. That's not going to work, Calyx said. But he was already climbing down beside Marcus, his forearms surprisingly efficient at moving sand. Probably not, Marcus agreed. But my grandfather used to say, the difference between surviving and dying is sometimes just being too busy to quit. So let's stay busy. They dug with controlled frenzy, each cadet finding their rhythm. The Solothian girl's bioluminescence provided light when the darkness became absolute. The Vothri brothers moved in perfect synchronization. their telepathic bond allowing them to coordinate without words. Even Instructor Thelkor abandoned her pretense of authority and joined the excavation, her tentacles scooping sand with surprising efficiency. The storm hit with a sound like a continent tearing in half. One moment the wall of plasma was distant, the next it consumed the world. The temperature jumped 60 degrees in 60 seconds. The electromagnetic pulse killed every electronic device not shielded by meters of stone or sand. In the command module, Lieutenant Vorak and his group had time for one scream before the plasma found the hull breaches and poured through, turning the transport into a brief, terrible star. In the trenches, pressed together in layers of alien flesh and shared terror, 17 cadets held onto thermal blankets with everything they had. The plasma roared overhead like an angry god, seeking entry, probing for weakness. Heat seared through the makeshift covers, turning the air inside the trenches to an oven temperature that made breathing an act of will. Marcus was on the top layer of the first trench, his body shielding 3 smaller cadets below. The thermal blanket he held bucked and strained against his grip, trying to tear free and expose them all. His palms were burning. He could smell his own flesh cooking against the hot metal panel he'd used to anchor one corner. The Granali male shared his burden, their combined strength barely enough to keep the covering in place. Someone below him was crying. Someone else was praying in a language he didn't recognize. The Vothri brothers were broadcasting calm through their telepathic link, sharing it with anyone nearby who could sense an island of mental stability in an ocean of terror. The storm lasted 47 minutes that felt like years. When it finally passed, rolling on to consume whatever lay southeast, the silence was broken only by ragged breathing and the occasional sob of relief. Marcus released the thermal blanket and tried to sit up, but his arms wouldn't respond. The Granali had to lift him bodily from the trench, setting him on the scorched sand with something approaching reverence. The landscape had transformed. The canyon walls were glass now, melted and reformed into smooth, reflective surfaces. The transport was gone, not destroyed but erased, reduced to a puddle of slag that glowed dully in the darkness. The sand itself had fused into a glittering black surface that crunched like gravel underfoot. One by one, the cadets emerged from their shelters, burned, exhausted, traumatized, but alive. All 17 who'd joined Marcus in the dig. All 17 who'd trusted a quiet human with an engineering degree and stories from an old war. Calyx was the first to speak, his translator crackling but functional. You saved us. Your primitive human tactics saved us when all our advanced knowledge failed. Marcus shook his head, cradling his burned hands. Not primitive, proven. My grandfather survived the wastes. His mother survived the Australian fires before that. Humans have been figuring out how to not die in terrible places for thousands of years. That's not special, that's just what you learn when your species evolves on a planet that keeps trying to kill you. He managed a weak smile. Welcome to the human approach to problem solving. Dig a hole and hope for the best. The Solothian girl knelt beside him, her bioluminescence dim but steady. On my world, we would honor you with the title of Shelterbringer. You gave us refuge when the universe offered none. On mine, Tom added, his deep voice gentle, we would call you Warfriend, one who faces death beside us. Marcus looked at each of them, these aliens who'd been classmates yesterday and survivors today. On mine, we'd just say you did what needed doing. But I appreciate it. The rescue ships arrived 36 hours later, their sensors finally able to penetrate the atmospheric disruption the Firestorm had left behind. The rescue coordinator, veteran Kryn admiral with medals from 3 wars, stared at the glassed canyon, the slag pool that had been a ship, and the 17 cadets sitting beside their makeshift trenches. How? She asked simply. 17 voices answered as one, in 7 languages but with perfect unity. The human showed us. The admiral turned to Marcus, who was having his hands treated by a medical unit. Cadet Reeves, I've read your file. Top 15% academically, 0 disciplinary issues, absolutely unremarkable in every measurable category. Yet you accomplished what trained officers could not. Marcus shrugged with his bandaged shoulders. I just remembered my grandfather's stories, ma'am. Turns out being human means carrying a few thousand years of survival knowledge in your back pocket. Sometimes that's enough. The Admiral studied him for a long moment. The Galactic Coalition has been evaluating human potential for strategic leadership positions. We've been cautious. Your species is young, aggressive, prone to unconventional thinking, but perhaps that's exactly what we need." She gestured at the trenches, still visible as scars in the glassed sand. "You saw a problem, adapted ancient techniques to alien circumstances, and led through example rather than authority. That's not tactics we can teach. That's instinct born from a hard world." Marcus stood carefully, looking back at the trenches one last time. In the growing light of 09's 3 suns, they looked less like graves and more like promises, proof that determination and shared burden could overcome even plasma and fire. "My grandfather had another saying," he told the admiral. "He said the most dangerous human is one who refuses to accept that survival is impossible, because we'll find a way anyway, even if we have to dig it out of the ground with our bare hands." Behind him, 16 alien cadets nodded in agreement. They'd learned that lesson in 47 minutes of hell, pressed together in holes carved from desperation and hope. They'd learned what it meant when a human said, "We survive," not as prediction, but as unbreakable promise. The transport home felt different. Marcus sat surrounded by his classmates instead of alone in the back. They shared stories, compared burns, and laughed with the giddy relief of people who'd seen death and chosen differently. Calix was already writing a paper on adapted historical combat tactics for non-military survival scenarios. The Solothian girl had declared her intention to study human history. Tom wouldn't stop calling him war friend, no matter how many times Marcus protested. Through the viewport, 09 shrank to a red dot against the stars. Somewhere down there, 3 trenches remained monuments to the day. 17 people learned that sometimes the old ways aren't primitive, just proven. That sometimes survival isn't about superior technology or perfect planning, but about getting your hands dirty and refusing to quit. Marcus closed his eyes, exhausted and hurting, but satisfied. His grandfather would have been proud. Not of the heroics, there hadn't been any, really, just hard work and stubbornness. But that was the human way, wasn't it? Face the impossible, grab whatever tool is available, and dig until there's room to breathe. The universe was vast and often hostile. But humanity had learned long ago how to carve out space in hostile places. One trench, one solution, one refused impossibility at a time.